Original music for this podcast has been provided by Ashiko Music Group 1 at gmail.com. Ashiko Music Group 1 at gmail.com.
Welcome to your Expat Expert podcast, where we share ways to study, volunteer, work, or retire abroad. Embrace this journey because your new life is about to begin. Today on the show, we have Miss Noelle Ojo, author of the Blaxit Effect, the African American's Guide to Relocating to Africa. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Tiffany, for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, good. So, Noelle, why and how did you start your international journey?
Okay, I'll try to make this quick and nerdy, but I have been, my first international trip was back in 2000 as a law student. I was able to get like a grant to go and do community work in Kenya with a legal aid organization. Nice. And I fell in love with being overseas, particularly with being in Africa. It was always a dream of mine to visit. And so I had the opportunity to go to Nairobi, Kenya. And I was there for a summer, about 12 weeks. Okay. And it changed me in some ways. That's kind of, I knew then that that's what I wanted to do. I didn't want to work at a firm. I wanted to do pretty much like development or some type of international work. I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted to do it abroad.
Right. And Kenya is a beautiful country. I've been there as well, so I definitely understand when you say that. So I was just wondering, how and when did you decide to write the Blaxit Effect, the African American's Guide to Relocating to Africa? Because I do have my book and I have been reading it. So the book in itself is amazing, how it talks about how to choose your destination and budgeting and your ideal lifestyle and doing scouting missions and just making sure that you respect the culture and welcoming, when you think of welcome home, all of that good stuff and that American savior complex. Like you pretty much touch everything in your book. So how and when did you decide to write it?
Well, first, thank you for that. It's always good to hear feedback. I think what kind of prompted me to write it is because I've been doing this now off and on for 20 years. So Kenya was my first, but as soon as I graduated from law school, I joined the Foreign Service with the Department of State, and I was assigned to Lagos, Nigeria. So I lived there for 2 years. Okay. Then I went to Yaoundé, Cameroon. I lived there for 2 years. Then I left the Foreign Service and went private sector to Nigeria, to Lagos. And I actually worked for a Nigerian firm, like a private equity firm. And then I took a little bit of a break. I got married to a Nigerian man. Had children back in the States. And then I joined the Foreign Service again, but this time with USAID. And then I got a chance to live in Senegal and then most recently in Accra. So through all this time, people would either write me directly, ask me directly, friends of mine, or people who had friends who would say, listen, Noelle, I have a friend or a contact or a student who is interested in kind of doing what you do, either because they wanted to be in diplomacy or they just wanted to live overseas, they wanted to be in Africa, they just wanted to talk to someone who had been living that lifestyle. And so I would just kind of informally share my experiences, share my thoughts, tips, guide, that kind of thing. Right. And then at some point, I was like, I might as well kind of put it in a book. There's a lot of, and then, with the resurgence of, in 2020, I think in the winter of 2019, Ghana had the return, right? So yes. You had a lot of African Americans who were pretty much invited to come to Ghana and really kind of almost like a kind of back to Africa, come to a place that's welcoming to you. Because remember, this is on the heels or as things were heating up with some of the racial violence that was happening in the United States. Right. And so there was an appetite for kind of going to a place where we might feel more welcome as Black people, right?
Right.
So then you had that, then you had COVID, then you had George Floyd, and people were like, oh, I'm done. And I really want to explore the option of living abroad, and more specifically in Africa.
Right,
so,
and Breonna Taylor.
More recently, I had exactly. So I was like, if I have this in my head, there are certain things that I realize that as African Americans, we have unique benefits, and then also unique challenges as Black people showing up in Black countries, right? And with the history. Right. And so just wanted to have an opportunity to kind of walk through and talk through some of those things, because sometimes we can be naive, right? At some point, sometimes, and then also about like what our experience will be. And then also as Americans, if you haven't really spent time in a developing country, it can be a culture shock, really a culture shock.
Oh, it will be, yes. It will be a culture shock, yes.
Exactly. For a variety of reasons, right? And
right.
So, and in America, it's a racialized society, so we find solidarity, our race, and maybe what we look like. You go to an all-Black country, that's not what's binding them, right? Within that country, it could be tribal, it could be language, it could be
economic status. Absolutely.
Exactly. So that can sometimes be a shock to us. It's like, oh, how can we do this? We're all Black, and it's like, we are, but that's not what drives behavior necessarily in the same way it would for us as Black Americans, right? So understanding that. So the book, I wanted to kind of bring up some of those things because I don't want people. I think it's a beautiful thing to spend time on the continent as Black people, and I think you can have a wonderful experience. I do. I think it'll be life changing. But I don't want some of these kind of misconceptions or lack of not having managed expectations about what you may or may not find there to ruin that, right? So that you go over there thinking one thing, it's not the experience you thought you should have, and now you hate it. So it's like, right. And then now you're not seeing the beauty in all the other things, So I just wanted a guide to help people understand, what it is, and in addition to just the nuts and bolts of moving. I mean, you understand, you live overseas, and just the hey, you need a passport, you need a visa, you need to move your things, and right. That kind of stuff as well,
Well, I thank you for answering, how and when you decided to write the book. So it's been a 20 plus year journey. But before we go, we're going to take a break. But I want to know, how can the audience reach out to you?
Okay. So as with, in these modern times, social media is the fastest way to get to me. And I've actually been communicating with some of my readers, which has been really cool. So you can reach me on Instagram at the Blaxit Effect, and so that's THE, and Blaxit is BLAXIT, and then Effect EFFECT. Also at my personal one, which is at FAMU Nojo. So you can tell from that I'm a rattler, FAMU rattler. So it's F as in Frank, AMU, and then Nojo, which is for Noelle Ojo, NOJO. So at FAMU Nojo, and then I have a website where you can purchase the book, either as a physical copy or an ebook, and that is www.theblaxiteffect.com. So THEBLAXITEFFECT.com. So you can reach me any of those ways.
Okay. Thank you. We will be back with Mrs. Noelle Ojo, author of The Blaxit Effect, the African American's Guide to Relocating to Africa.
Have you studied, volunteered, lived, or worked abroad? Share your international experience with us. We want to hear from you. Feel free to contact us at yourexpatexpert@gmail.com.
We are back with Mrs. Noelle Ojo, author of The Blaxit Effect, the African American Guide to Relocating to Africa. Now, Noelle, you explained how and when you decided to write your book, but can you also explain your services?
Sure. So I just published the book in June, so we're kind of just getting off the ground, and one of the things I'm primarily doing is really just promoting the book, right? Getting the word out about Africa as an option for people who would like to do a Blaxit, which is, Black Americans in particular leaving the continent, leaving the United States and heading abroad, but for a different life. In addition to this, I plan on having in the future, probably starting in the fall, and I'll have information on my website as this comes up, but different workshops and webinars about on the various topics. So we might have a topic about the cultural adaptation. We might have a topic on choosing your location, finding work overseas and work options, things along those lines. And so we'll do those for reasonable prices, because I want to make it accessible to as many people who are interested. In addition, I am also preparing to be on the speaker circuit with a couple of topics. One, Blaxiting to Africa, which is what the book is about, but also to encourage particularly young people, high school and college age, to consider careers overseas, to consider international job opportunities. I know when I was a student, it never even occurred to me that this could be an option, right? Like either in the private sector or with the government or things like that. So to focus on that, as well as conversations. I used to work in a university setting. I worked at Howard University for a little while, and particularly worked with international students, and trying to have a couple of series or talks about the African and African American student relationship on campuses. There's a lot of misconceptions, but there's also a lot of opportunity for working together and community. And so just to have sometimes those dialogues. So those are the topics that I will discuss in my speaking life. And so I'm available to speak to different groups when needed on those topical areas.
Okay, and is that how you see the future of the Blaxit Effect? With the book and the speaking? If I could build this brand out, definitely, I would like to be someone who, serves as a thought leader on this topic, to be able to bring in my friends and contacts who have been living this life. I know dozens and dozens of African Americans who are living abroad in a variety of ways, whether they're there as entrepreneurs, whether they're with the government, whether they're there as teachers, whether they're there in the private sector. There are different experiences, particularly in Africa. So I do hope to, as I start to do some of my seminars, have those people on and have these open conversations about the fact that if you're interested in doing this, you can do it with proper preparation. It's possible. And I strongly encourage every African American to think about it. It doesn't have to be forever. You don't have to stay overseas for 20 years. Right. You don't even have to stay for 10 or 5. Right. Even if you do it for, I recommend a minimum of 2 years, because I think just going through the cycle of adjustment, you need at least that amount of time to really understand a location and place. But anywhere, even if it's 2 to 5 years, just to have that experience, it will be life-changing, and I think in a positive way. So I hope the brand kind of gets that word out about the beauty of Blaxiting to Africa as an African American. Well, Noelle, I want to thank you so much for sharing your journey. And your book is so resourceful. So I want to thank you for writing the book. Even though it took you 20 years, it's done.
Exactly.
But before we go, how can we contact you? Again?
Okay, so you can reach me on Instagram 2 different ways. You can do it at the Blaxit Effect, and Blaxit is spelled Blaxit. Or at my personal address, Instagram handle is at FAMUNojo, because I'm a rattler. F is in Frank, A is in Apple, M is in man, U is in university, and then Nojo. N, like Noelle, and my last name Ojo, so FAMUNojo. That's the easiest way to reach me for direct messaging. And then we have my website, which will have where you can purchase the book, as well as any upcoming seminars and webinars that I may have. And so that address is www.theblaxiteffect.com. And I do have for your listeners, Tiffany, a discount code, a promo code for the book, 20% off, either for the physical copy or the digital copy. That's Blaxit Now, Blaxit Now, Now, when you are in the checkout. So really, thank you for having me.
Thank you. I noticed you mentioned you're a rattler. You mentioned it a couple of times, and I'm a Tennessee State University Tiger, but we can discuss that offline.
Hey, it's all HBCU love.
All HBCU love, yes. Okay, well, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening. We hope this gives you some creative ideas on how you can study, volunteer, work, or retire abroad. Shout out to my sound editor, Martin, and Ashiko Music Group. Feel free to follow us through our social media channels listed in the description below. See you next time.